All right. Well, this game, it needs literally no introduction, so I'm just going to get right into it. Damn it. Well, this game needs literally no introduction, so let's just write... Fuck me. I can't fucking talk.
Ew.
Ooh.
Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, a.k.a. Duo for Real, and I'm also your host.
Hell yeah. Another episode, dude. Another one.
Another one.
Right back at you. Kirby. Man,
Kirby, right back at you.
Right back
Best
at you.
TV show of all time.
Right. And instead of a video game review, we're doing a TV show review. So, no, just kidding. But
That'd
yeah.
be interesting.
It would be. But yeah, there's not really any announcements this episode, but I will say we've been on that Smash Ultimate grind, hardcore.
Well, mostly you. I've been really busy this week and have had like no time to play.
True. Yeah, I have no life, so I just play Smash. I've actually put in like 50 hours into the game at least already. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. I should probably seek help, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk to you about a snazzy new game. Right.
Well, it's actually a pretty old game,
yeah,
as are most of them, but I appreciate the sentiment. Do you want to just get right into it? It just seems weird for us to like go straight into the review without a bunch of like bullshit beforehand.
Well, let's set a new trend, my brother.
Well, this game needs literally no introduction, so let's get right into it. This game is Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen.
Yeah, the obligatory after the game announcement.
Yeah. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen, extremely famous Game Boy Advance games. There are two of them, count them, two versions, as Pokemon often does. I mean, it's a Pokemon game, right? And I really highly doubt there are people in our audience who don't know at least a little bit about Pokemon or Pokemon games.
Yeah.
But you know, I like to do my research. I got some facts, some context to lay down for all the listeners, those who might be interested. Generation 1 of Pokemon, famous generation, that came out in 96 in Japan with the red and green versions. But then in 98, America got the red and blue versions, which are kind of like more polished versions of what Japan had gotten 2 years prior. So North America and the rest of the world kind of late on that train, but we got, you know, the very famous Pokemon games that started the huge Pokemon craze. So after that came Gold and Silver and Crystal for the second generation, and then after that came Ruby and Sapphire, which was the third generation in 2002 and 2003. And those were the first games to come on the Game Boy Advance. And by this point, Nintendo, I don't know exactly what made them want to do this, but they decided to update and re-release the Generation 1 games alongside the new Ruby and Sapphire games. So a couple years after Ruby and Sapphire came out, we got Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen. Actually, I think it was only 1 year. These games came out in 2004, I think. Mm-hmm. And so we were treated to this beautiful new reimagining of the first generation of Pokemon with all the modern updates that had come along since then. And it's just a real treat of a game. I think that a lot of people really love this game. And Kev, I believe you do too, right?
Well, you'll have to tune in to the rest of this episode to find out.
Dang.
But I do like my Gen 1. That is literally my first video game was Pokemon Yellow, and it counts as Gen 1. So I do have a big heart for that one. But this game, I've never played it extensively until now. But I will say it does feel like that old classic retro Pokemon style that I've missed. You know, it's having all these new capabilities is nice, but it's really nice to get back to the classics for sure.
You know, I kind of get the impression from being on YouTube and Twitch and stuff that FireRed and LeafGreen are kind of like the default Pokemon games now. To where like if people want to play Pokemon or do some sort of Pokemon Nuzlocke or whatever, it always seems like it's FireRed and LeafGreen, and specifically FireRed, I guess because fire is cooler than leaves or something. But I was wondering if you kind of got that impression too.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the FireRed LeafGreen Nuzlocke. It's kind of interesting that you mention it, but I know the Smasher Hugs and I think Ludwig, they do their Nuzlocks and then they face off at the end. So yeah.
They do. A lot of good FireRed and LeafGreen content floating around there for people who just can't get enough Pokemon. There's always some good videos and Let's Plays to watch. So you said that Pokemon Yellow was your first video game ever?
Yeah.
Wow. I don't remember what my first video game was. Probably Super Mario World, the best video game of all time. But
right.
But Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire in 2003. I might have gotten the game later than it actually came out. But basically, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, specifically Sapphire, was my first ever Pokemon game. So I was pretty late to the Pokemon party. I had a bunch of friends who had Pokemon cards, and I would kind of look at the cards, and I watched like 1 or 2 episodes of the anime, so I knew like the Gen 1 and Gen 2 Pokemon, but I never played any of it until 2003 or 2004. So for me, FireRed and LeafGreen were my first like Gen 1 experience, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we'll get into this when we get into the meat and potatoes, but I feel like these remakes do the original such justice that I don't really feel the need to go back and play the first gen for myself, because I never have done that, and I honestly don't really feel the need to, because these remakes are just so good.
Yeah. I'll save my comments on that for the meat and potatoes, but I agree. If you're looking for a way to replay Gen 1, like it might, unless you're really a big fan of retro games, you're probably going to want to stick with FireRed or LeafGreen if you're wanting a Gen 1 experience. Or even now, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee.
Yeah, a game that you and Chris have played a lot of as well. I haven't hopped on that yet. I might just wait out for the new Pokemon game coming out next year.
Oof,
But yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, this is a great Pokemon game to jump into. Like, if you're a person who's never played Pokemon but you're interested, I would definitely say FireRed and LeafGreen is a good way to start.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. Are you ready to dive straight into those potatoes and meats?
I am so ready. Do you want to do the honors, actually, and start off with some gameplay?
I do. So, I'll dive right in, and we're going to be talking about gameplay. So, having the ability to incorporate Gen 3 mechanics into a Gen 1 Pokemon game was really nice. It's nice to see Gen 1 get so much attention and love, because, they kind of definitely made Pokemon what it is. I mean, I know they've refined the process since then. There's a lot more Pokemon, a lot more mechanics and stuff like that. But, I mean, Pokemon was really defined by its first games. People were like, this is an amazing concept that you can get behind. And Gen 1 has a lot of iconic Pokemon. So it's really nice to see Nintendo and Game Freak revisit these Gen 1 games and just try to show their love for them, essentially.
Yeah.
Honestly, who can't love how Pokemon mechanics work? Like, I feel like it already gets a lot of points by default just for that. And I really like how, like I mentioned earlier, this retro style, not really retro, but more retro than today's Pokemon, where it just doesn't hold your hand as much, and you can just kind of feel like it's competitive, at least to a little bit. And especially if you're playing a Nuzlocke, like it gives you a pretty decent challenge. It's not incredibly hard, but it's like a good amount of difficulty. So I really can appreciate that.
Yeah. An interesting thing about that is that this game, or this remake, introduced a new little help mechanic that no previous Pokemon game had. Even the other Gen 3 games, Ruby and Sapphire, didn't have like a little help screen you could go into. But those help screens, they didn't really do anything hand-holdy. They just kind of told you like how certain mechanics worked and like what buttons did what. So it wasn't really an aid so much as just a reference. So, but I think that's a good step for them to take, though. They were making the game maybe a little bit more accessible, but they weren't holding your hand through it. So I think that was a pretty good improvement.
Right. One critique I do have is that, kind of thinking about it like as a whole conceptually, and coming from a perspective of, starting with Gen 1, it wasn't really a new experience for me. It was kind of more of the same. And so I wasn't immediately like compelled by the gameplay. Like, there weren't too many new things and it wasn't super innovative. It really felt like playing Gen 1 over again. And yeah, that was kind of one thing that I noticed.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like the core mechanics of Pokemon have never really changed. It's always been about, you know, capturing the critters and fighting against other critters and having like that rock, paper, scissors sort of type versus type matchup thing. Like all that's been the same and will probably continue to be the same into infinity. But
True.
But I think what is important about this, the gameplay of this, is that it made a bunch of small refinements that like kind of amount to quality of life improvements at the end of the day. Stuff like bug fixes and features that, or maybe not features, but like things that didn't age well, bring them back into the modern time for when this game came out. And really just made it feel like a smoother game. Like I haven't played Gen 1, but I have played Gen 2, which is very similar to Gen 1 in a bunch of ways, because the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color weren't really all that separated from each other. And in Gen 2, there are things like you have to always save the game before you go into the box to get Pokemon. And like the whole process of withdrawing and depositing Pokemon is a pretty like tedious one. And that's just one example that I'm thinking of, but I'm sure that there are others too. And in Gen 3, with these two remakes, they just brought that back up to the more streamlined process that Ruby and Sapphire had. So it's just kind of like a smoother overall experience. And while that doesn't amount to, you know, a totally new game for someone like you, I still think it's a really good improvement. And it makes people like me want to experience it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we're coming from different perspectives, because you didn't come from Gen 1, you came from Gen 3. And so it's like taking Gen 3 into Gen 1, and that's like the perfect game. I think like you're like Nintendo's target audience for this game.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I was, yeah.
It like perfect. And I think it was during this time they were like, well, we want to, you know, have something to introduce people to Pokemon, not just overwhelm them with all these different kinds of Pokemon. It's like, let's go back to the basics. I think there's a really big push for that. And I think you also had mentioned that you can't get certain Pokemon in Gen 3, and this was a way for them to get those Pokemon, for you to get all of, like, I don't know how many, but 400 Pokemon at the time.
Yeah.
But I think you're prime target audience.
Prime Pete audience. As far as mechanics go, there are some that were in Ruby and Sapphire that didn't make it over to FireRed and LeafGreen. Things like growing berries wasn't really a thing in FireRed and LeafGreen. Breeding Pokemon was introduced in Gen 2. So in Gen 1, you can't breed Pokemon until the post-game, which is a pretty important part that I'd like to talk about in the content section. And then like double battles, which were also introduced in Ruby and Sapphire. There might be a couple in the main game, but there aren't many. Yeah, there's very few. So they didn't totally retrofit the game to be, you know, like to include every single mechanic, but they brought in things like special defense and special attack being separate stats, which in Gen 1 they were the same stat. And like the game has the same kind of fluidity, and like the menus kind of work the same way as in Gen 3, the mainline games in Gen 3. So it's just more of those like quality of life improvements like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. That one of the things you mentioned was kind of my critiques, is that, you know, they did some things with Ruby and Sapphire that they just didn't really include in this one. I feel like they had a whole lot of capability and like potential for it to just kind of incorporate some new mechanics, some fun new, essentially life into Gen 1. But really, for me, it just kind of felt like playing the same game, as I've already said. So it kind of knocks some points on it for me, especially since I feel like there's other Pokemon games that did it better. Like, I wouldn't say FireRed LeafGreen is like the best Pokemon game in terms of gameplay. I would actually even argue it's probably like, you know, Ruby Sapphire. I think those are one of the better gameplay, like especially in terms of improvements, right? Like they kind of just did a whole bunch of crazy stuff that I really enjoyed in Gen 3. And I know that's personal preference. Other people may view it differently, but yeah, it's just kind of how I was feeling about it.
I think that Nintendo and Game Freak were walking a fine line between like remaking the game and what's the best way to phrase this? I feel like they didn't want to introduce too many things that would have been new to Gen 1. For example, like the berries and the double battles and stuff. They probably wanted to hold off on that to keep the experience a little more pure to the Gen 1 experience, which for people like you has the effect of having it be, you know, less innovative and less interesting.
Yeah.
But for people like me, that makes it feel more like the throwback that I had never gotten.
Yeah.
And for me, that made it different from Gen 3. Like, oh, there's no berries. Oh, that's an interesting difference. So it's kind of like the opposite for me.
Yeah.
Where if it had all the same stuff, then I would have been like, oh, you know, this, like, I mean, the region and the Pokemon are different, and that's like worth way more in terms of gameplay difference, obviously. But little things being the same would have contributed to it feeling, a little more of like a. I couldn't end that thought elegantly, but I think you
like a glow
see
up.
where I'm going at.
Yeah, glow up, as they say. And it's kind of interesting to also point out, it's like, let's say you've played Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3, like you play Ruby and Sapphire, and then you go to this game, you're like, okay, well, this is like less features than what I previously played, but then also like just Gen 1. And I guess that's kind of the feeling that I had. So I feel like if you've played all the, like at that time when it came out, you had played all the generations up to that point, it was just kind of like meh. And so I kind of even dropped off of Pokemon after Gen 3. Like after they did FireRed, LeafGreen, I was kind of like, that's kind of cool, but I was never like, you know, compelled enough to get it. And I started being like, oh, well, Pokemon's not cool. And I was stupid wrong, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
You mentioned the menus. I remember when I was playing on stream, there's like a lot of animations with the menus that take a long time, and I don't remember what exactly it is, but you had mentioned, I hate that. I think, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so the one that I can think of right away is whenever you like use a potion on a Pokemon, outside of battle, it's important to note that when you're in battle and you use items, it's a lot faster, but if you're in the field and you use a potion on your Charizard or whatever, like there will be an animation of like a potion attaching itself to the Charizard, and like it goes and it's like this whole song and dance. And I mean, to their credit, you can skip it by pressing A, but it is like really silly.
Yeah.
And I feel like they were trying to, because that's something that is new to this pair of remakes, because Ruby and Sapphire didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so I think Nintendo was like, oh, like this is a fun feature where it looks like you're giving your Pokemon a potion. That's cool. And I think they realized it wasn't cool, because I don't think games did that after that point. So they learned their lesson.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like the only real knock I have against the menu or user interface experiences, that particular thing.
Yeah, I remember there being some small things like that I'm like, I don't remember this from any other Pokemon game. And I think there's a lot of just like interesting menu things that like don't get incorporated into the new games. It's interesting.
I think as far as like gameplay mechanics go, the only things that I would want to be improved on, like as far as the core Pokemon gameplay goes, the only improvements I can think of are ones that future games did. The biggest example for me is the split between special moves and physical moves. And just to explain that really briefly, by this point in the Pokemon franchise, there were types whose moves were always special, and then types whose moves were always physical. So Fire type was always special, and Fighting type was always physical. So if your Pokemon had a high attack stat, but it mostly had special attacks, and it was a special type Pokemon, then you're not really getting the full potential of the Pokemon from that standpoint. Because you can't like make the best use of whichever stat corresponds with your type. But in Gen 4 and onwards, they split the moves so that any type could have both physical and special moves. So that makes Pokemon a lot more flexible, and it means that a bunch of Pokemon play to their strengths better than they used to. And so one thing for me is like, oh, I would love to have gone back to Fire Red or even to Ruby and Sapphire and play with those rules rather than every move always being like physical or special depending on the type. So like now that I know that that is a mechanic that I like, I would want this game to have that. But before I knew about the mechanic, I didn't care. You know, like it's just like it's like a total hindsight improvement that I can't really like judge this game poorly for. You know what I mean?
Especially if you're playing a Nuzlocke, because I feel like nowadays, if you're going back and playing these games, a lot of times I would be willing to wager that it's some people that have that nostalgic feel, or maybe I've just never played this particular version. And if you're playing a Nuzlocke of it, that's definitely a very important thing to consider.
Yeah. The cool thing I think about Pokemon, and this is kind of my last note on gameplay, one cool thing is just how much depth there is that's like totally hidden and kind of optional in a sense. For example, when I was younger and like I was first playing Pokemon, I didn't really know how important stats were for Pokemon. So I'd wonder like, oh, this Pokemon seems weaker than the other one. Like, I wonder why that is. Oh, well, moving on. Like, not really checking stats or anything.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, stats are clearly visible when you go find them in the menu. But even beyond that, there are things like EVs or effort values, not the Pokemon EV. And basically, they're a mechanic that ensures that trained Pokemon are always stronger than wild Pokemon. And there are ways where you can EV train your Pokemon so that you can get them to be the buffest and like whatever stat you choose. And that's totally possible, and it's a thing you can do, but it's really hidden. Mm-hmm. And I think it's cool. To me, it kind of is reminiscent of Super Smash Bros. Melee, the other best game of all time, alongside Super Mario World, where like the skill floor can be fairly low. You can enjoy the game without being great at it or knowing everything that's going on behind the curtain. Or you can like get into the weeds and get into the nitty gritty and into the meat and potatoes. Well, you're beyond the meat and potatoes by that point. You're in like the I don't know, the spinach and cheese or something. And,
the dessert.
And really get into it. And I think it's cool that that's like entirely optional. It's, I was happy playing Pokemon when I was little and didn't know any of that shit. And I'm happy now when I'm older and I know about it, but don't necessarily care about every single thing.
Yeah, damn. I agree with you. So passionate, Peter. So passionate about the Pokemon world.
I love Pokemon.
Sinna, roar, Sinna.
Sinna, roar.
But yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't really have much more to say than that, but yeah, it's really immersive, and you can really dive as deep as you want to. And it's really cool in that aspect. I would say I hope they're not trying to take some of that away, because it sounds like, at least with Pokemon Let's Go, which they've already came out and said, hey, we're watering that kind of stuff down. But I really hope they keep that aspect to Pokemon always, because I think there's a really strong community that loves that kind of stuff about the games. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't foresee them doing anything radical with the next mainline game. I think Let's Go is like pretty clearly an exception, and it's a side game is what it is. So
yeah,
I'm personally optimistic. I don't think they'll like remove too much of the depth that we've enjoyed, but only time will tell.
Yep.
Whatever Nintendo does, they will have their wild Nintendo reason for doing so.
Yeah. Ugh, don't get me started on that. Anyway, I think that does it for me on gameplay. How about you, buddy?
I am all spent. You want to go ahead and give your score?
Hell yeah. I gave it a hot, fresh, cold, spicy, medium, large, small, 85.
Sorry, one more time?
85.
85. Nice, yeah. Nice. I got lost in all those adjectives, so I just had to had to get another one.
Another one.
Well, you might be... I don't know how you're going to react to my score, but I gave it a loud, soft, far away, nearby, upside down, right side up, 95.
Ooh. Yeah, I kind of expected that from hearing you talk about the gameplay. You sounded really passionate, so
yeah,
I'm not surprised there. We meet in the middle, and the gameplay's at a 90. I feel like that's okay. Like I said, I don't know that it really does a whole lot in terms of the series, but I think we're coming from different perspectives again on this particular game, so
yeah,
I can see that, and it makes sense.
Yeah, I think if you're coming at it from like it's just a remake, then it's like outstanding. And if you're looking at it wanting it to be something more, then you might be disappointed. So I think that our different perspectives make a lot of sense here. Heck
yeah, man. Well, let's get on to everyone's favorite section, aesthetics. All right, kick us off with the visuals, man.
All right. Well, actually, I'm pretty excited to talk about the visuals because I gave them 100. Just kidding, I didn't.
Okay.
So with the visuals, I think actually this might be one of the main reasons why Nintendo decided to, or Game Freak, or both of them, decided to make the game when they did. And here's why. So in this in these remakes, you get the same upgraded Game Boy Advance graphics as you did in Ruby and Sapphire, which means like this is the first game where, actually, no, you know what? I'm totally wrong. I was about to say this is the first game where the first gen Pokemon really look like their artwork. Because in gens 1 and 2, like, you know, they're pretty blocky or like they can't use all the colors. So I was about to say that in this game, like you finally can see Moltres in all of its glory, like just like it looks on the Pokemon cards, but now it's in the video game. But I failed to realize that Pokémon Stadium came out before this game. So you could see the Pokemon in 3D. So I guess my point's kind of moot.
Yeah.
A little bit. But to my credit, to save my point, Pokemon Stadium wasn't a real Pokemon game.
Oof.
So, oof. Don't at me.
Don't at me, man. See our review.
Yeah, see previous. But this is the first mainline Pokemon game where you could have all of the Gen 1 Pokemon looking just like they do in their official artwork and the cards and everything. So I think that is like really valuable, and I think a lot of people definitely got a kick out of that.
Right. Well, I mean, Crystal had some pretty good looking sprites, did it not?
I think it did. And Crystal also did the thing where the sprites had little animations, like when a battle first started, which this game did do away with. So I was kind of disappointed on that. And Sapphire and Ruby also did away with that. Emerald came after these two games. So Emerald was like the last of the Gen 3 games to come out. And Emerald did bring that back, so that's cool. But I am kind of disappointed they didn't do that sooner.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, honestly, I really enjoyed Ruby and Sapphire and Crystal, all of their visuals. I don't remember too much of what Gold and Silver look like. I don't remember them being too bad. I enjoyed Yellow's visuals, definitely over Red and Blue, because those were pretty rough.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good upgrade, especially if you're looking back at Gen 1. You're like, okay, cool, yeah, I could see Gen 1, and they looking good. They looking mighty fine. I will say, in terms of like the landscape, I feel like it was pretty bare. They didn't do a whole lot with it like they did in Ruby and Sapphire. In Ruby and Sapphire, they incorporated like a whole bunch of like weather stuff, and like there's like puddles and tall grass, and it's just like they did a whole lot more work into the environment for Ruby and Sapphire. And it's kind of sad to see they, like I said, once again, they didn't incorporate some of those things into FireRed and LeafGreen.
Yeah, that was actually like almost verbatim one of the points that I wrote down was like, lack of weather mechanics on the overworld decreases the amount of visual variety compared to Ruby and Sapphire.
I was reading your notes.
Oh,
no,
shit.
I'm just kidding.
got that Nest Cam. Yeah, like, and I think that again comes back to them trying to be like more faithful. If this were, it makes me kind of wonder how Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the Gen 4 remakes of Gen 2, how they approach that sort of thing, like how much new stuff they injected into the older games. Because obviously the graphics were way better overall, but I'm not too familiar with those remakes, so I'm kind of wondering if they injected more new stuff compared to these remakes.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is it's like, yeah, we love Gen 1 and there's some, we like to see all the good colors and like much higher resolution graphics, essentially. But we do want to see all that stuff that you put into Gen 3 as well. At least I enjoyed those. I don't know if like they didn't include those because people were like, I don't like this. But I really enjoyed some of the things they did with Gen 3 in terms of the environment and how it looked and some of the animations. So I was a little bit disappointed in it, but at the same time, they're pretty good, especially for considering the time and, like, shit, it's a Gen 1 remake. Like, it's like we finally get to see these Pokemon. So
yeah,
I think I'm pretty mixed on it. But yeah, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar, I think, to our approach to the gameplay section where it's like, it's almost too faithful of a remake considering the stuff they could have added if they wanted to. Yeah,
that's a good point.
I have some more notes that are getting more into personal preference, so these don't affect my score as much, but
right.
But I do want to voice them because I like to hear myself say my opinions on a podcast.
Right.
So one thing I noticed, and I didn't notice this until like pretty recently, is that these remakes have a pretty like noticeably brighter like vibrant color palette, I think, compared to Ruby and Sapphire. And it's kind of hard to describe it. I just feel like in Ruby and Sapphire, there's like fewer like bright yellows and reds and stuff, and like it looks a little more like a realistic color palette to me, the environment and the menus and everything. Whereas in FireRed LeafGreen, like the greens are like brighter and like they have more like yellow gold like flair to them. And even the menus, like actually this is probably the point where I noticed this the most, is that the menus in FireRed LeafGreen look like too cheerful to me. Like there's so many reds and yellows and like pastel-y colors. Mm-hmm. And in Ruby and Sapphire, it's more toned back and it's a little more like serious looking. And it, like for me, I think it's total personal preference that I prefer Ruby and Sapphire. But also those are my first Pokemon games ever, so I think I'm going to prefer everything in those games to everything else forever.
Right.
But that's just my own take on that sort of thing.
I kind of agree with you on those. It kind of felt like when you were going through the environment, it just kind of felt really plain. Like it's just very generic. You're just kind of like, okay, yeah, cool. And you're in like Ruby and Sapphire, you're like, okay, like this is dynamic. Like there's like, you know, it's cloudy here, or it's like, I don't know. You could tell you were in different areas in Ruby and Sapphire, whereas like, I don't know, FireRed LeafGreen, almost forgot the game we're reviewing. It just felt very plain in that aspect. And then you're right on the menus. They went a little too try hard on that. I find it odd that they went try hard on some things that I didn't really necessarily need them to be try hard on, but on the others I did. So it's just, I don't know. They did some weird things, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But it was interesting game to review. I really like that we did this one.
Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense for them to have treated the visuals, or at least like the bright colors thing. Because to me, and I can't really pin this down, but to me, Gen 1 feels like a brighter sort of generation, like a brighter game.
Happier.
Because Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire have like more serious themes and stuff, and like it's like kind of edgy, and their audience is getting a little bit older by that point. So for them to like have all these bright colors in this remake, I think it's kind of harkening back to the glory days, I guess, of like 8 years prior or 6 years or whatever it was. So I understand it, even though I don't prefer it necessarily.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot more to say than what we've said.
I have a fun fact, and that'll do it for me.
I like that. Let's hear it.
So actually, before the fun fact is a point that's related to the fun fact. One thing I really don't like visuals-wise is that when you're talking to NPCs, the male NPCs have bright blue text, and then the female NPCs have bright red text. And to me, it's like totally distracting, because like I can usually tell by looking at it whether they're male or female. Not that it really matters most of the time anyway, because like their gender isn't important. But it's just like, that to me is one of like the try-hard things that you were mentioning. Like we didn't need this feature.
Right.
But the fun fact is that in the Japanese version, the difference between the male and female dialogue is not based on color, but it's actually based on the font that they use for the Japanese text. So the male NPCs have a more like computer-looking rigid font for their text, whereas the font for the females is a little more hand-drawn looking. Which to me, I looked at a screenshot of this, and to me the differences were pretty minimal, but I'm also not familiar with reading Japanese, so it's probably more obvious to Japanese readers. But I thought that was a pretty interesting thing that they did.
Yeah, it is a pretty interesting fact. I guess it's kind of like they're trying to simulate the effect of like the differences in voices that they perceive to be true.
Yeah, I guess that has to be it, huh?
Yeah.
Kind of weird. Kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, cool. I guess that does it for our visuals. So
visuals.
Let's give our ratings.
All right. I gave it a 90.
Ooh, I gave it an 85 again.
You know, I actually had it at 95 until about halfway through our conversation. and when we got to the part about the environment and like the lack of variety in this game, I had written that down, but like I didn't weigh it as heavily until we were talking about it. I was like, yeah, you know what? Fuck this. Give it a 90, dog.
Screw that. Yeah. I just feel like, you know, they could have done with the capabilities that we already knew they had. Why weren't they incorporated into this game?
Yeah.
So that's my piece.
It's also possible that this game was like a little bit rushed because it did come out just a year after Ruby and Sapphire, maybe like a year and a half. And I'm sure they were probably developing it at the same time for a period, so there was probably like a little bit of a push.
Yeah,
it's at least a possibility.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the audio.
Actually, I just thought of one more thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So one thing that's kind of neat is that between Ruby and Sapphire and FireRed LeafGreen, all of the Pokemon have unique sprites for each pair of games. So, like, the Geodude in Ruby looks different than the Geodude in FireRed, and it's the same for all Pokemon. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Like, they could have totally easily reused the sprites, but they didn't. So that's neat.
Yeah. Wait, so for Ruby and Sapphire, Geodude looks different than FireRed LeafGreen? Yeah. That's interesting. I feel like if they would have just ported those over and then worked on the environment. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on that too much, but cool. That is an interesting fact. I didn't know that.
But I do prefer the Ruby and Sapphire sprites like 90% of the time. So.
Yeah. I really do appreciate the fact, because you are really good at knowing or having a lot of Pokemon knowledge. And I have Pokemon knowledge, but I wouldn't say it's extensive. So it's really nice to hear all of this kind of stuff that I don't particularly know. You're really good at telling the details on these things, and I really appreciate that. So
thanks, man.
Thanks for the perspective, man.
I love you too.
Love you too. Well, now moving on to the audio.
Yes.
I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to say, I really like the Gen 1 soundtrack. And typically it hits home for me, but I feel like, once again, like over a reoccurring theme here, I don't feel like it brought a whole lot different or more to the table. It's just, Gen 1, it was kind of basic, but I mean, at the time, it was really good, and you're like, oh, I love these themes, but as you're playing this game, you're like, okay, I've heard these, but you're not doing too much different with it, and it still sounds, on the Game Boy Advance, you can only do so much, but it just didn't really I wasn't like wowed by it, I should say.
I have a question for you. I don't know if you'll know the answer, but when I was watching people play Pokemon Let's Go, I noticed that some of the music tracks in the game, like in the towns mostly, were shorter than their FireRed LeafGreen equivalents. So, like, one example of this is the Vermilion City theme. And, like, I don't expect you to remember, like, the details of each theme, but I noticed that the Vermilion City theme in Let's Go seemed like it was literally, like, half the length of the FireRed LeafGreen theme. Like, they just cut the loop off early and had it loop way earlier. And I was wondering, like, oh, why is that? Like, did they run out of storage space in Pokemon Let's Go for all the music, or, like, what's the deal? And so I was wondering if FireRed LeafGreen actually, like, increased the length of some of the songs from the original Gen 1 games, and if Pokemon Let's Go reverted that change and made it, like, more faithful. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
I don't. I actually didn't even notice that. It's just like, yep, sounds like Vermilion City. And so I'm just doing my thing. So I don't know. I didn't really notice that, but that's very interesting. I didn't notice that.
And the reason I bring that up is because if it's true that FireRed LeafGreen, like, extended some of the music from Gen 1, I feel like that would be a really cool change if that is what happened.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, like a extensive. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Remix.
Remix. I don't know. But when I think of FireRed LeafGreen and I start to think about soundtrack, I don't really know what to think of except Gen 1. Like, when I say, oh yeah, the FireRed LeafGreen soundtrack, you don't think that. You think, Gen 1, you think Pokemon Yellow, Blue, Red.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, like, I know they couldn't do too much different, and it is a remake, and you kind of want the same tracks. But I feel like they could have gotten a little more creative with it. But, kudos for, I guess, if true, yeah, extending it a little bit.
Big if true.
Yeah. But they didn't really, They didn't get too crazy, which I guess that's kind of their goal. It seems to be their theme for this game. They're like, we want it to feel like Gen 1. Maybe that's their goal here. But I don't know.
I think this is the point where I don't really like. So your perspective for these past few categories has been like you were kind of bummed that they didn't innovate more, right? Like that's a fair summary of what you've been saying for the most part. But for this section in particular, I don't see how they could have really innovated it more. Like, because they did, Gen 1 was all just the bleeps and bloops like every Game Boy game was. And then in Gen 3, they're bringing out all the instruments, all the little synthesizers and trumpets and drums and all that stuff. And I feel like that really is a really big step up from Gen 1 to Gen 3. So I'm just not really sure like what else you would expect from them.
Well, I mean, I didn't hear too many trumpets and synthesizers in FireRed and LeafGreen like I did in Ruby and Sapphire. And would I be wrong in saying that?
Okay, well, the trumpets, yeah, because the Hoenn horns are great memes.
I actually really liked those.
Yeah, but I think my point still stands where like they have all this full instrumentation with all these strings and stuff and drums and piano and whatever. And I just don't really see where you're coming from with like wanting it to be more.
I mean, it's just not that great. I don't know. It's not like I want to listen to the FireRed LeafGreen soundtrack. I mean, when people remake stuff, like especially in terms of music, you don't want. I just feel like you can mix it up in some ways. Like you think of any cover song ever, like not everybody does it the same way, and you can do different interpretations of the same music. I mean, hell, the game started out with like some very basic bleeps and bloops, and they did a pretty good job. I just feel like I don't know, I wasn't wowed by it, but to each their own. I didn't give it a bad score. I still think it's got a lot of iconic songs and that you can really jam to. I wasn't. I mean, that's my only critique.
Yeah. Well, I think this is just going to be an instance where I just don't really agree with you. So.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I just want to agree with you on everything because I love you so much, Kevin.
It's okay. It won't always happen. But it sounds like you really have a heart for this game, and
what's funny is that like I prefer Ruby and Sapphire in pretty much every single way ever, but I still think these remakes are really good.
Yeah, like and that's kind of where I'm coming from too. I'm like, okay, yeah, the soundtrack's cool and all, and what I'm saying is they didn't bring a whole lot new to the table in terms of the soundtrack.
That's because it's a remake, Kevin.
But I understand
it's a remake,
that. But
it's not a remix.
You have to compare it to the rest of the series. You can't say, well, it's a remake, so, I mean, they did the same thing, but you can't exactly rate it the same as you would Ruby and Sapphire if it is one of your favorite soundtracks. Like, I wouldn't rate it both a 95. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I think they're better, I'm going to rate that soundtrack better. And if I'm like, well, FireRed LeafGreen is just the same thing and doesn't feel like a whole lot different, then, I mean, I also prefer Ruby and Sapphire soundtrack over the Gen 1 soundtrack. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say. It would get a higher rating from me than Gen 1's, but...
Well, I still don't really... I mean, I get what you're saying there, but I still don't see what you would want them to do more with the music. But anyway, I think we've been over that enough. Do you want to talk about the sound effects? Because I know that's something that you are also interested in.
Yeah, they did a lot of... I do like a lot of the sound effects they carried over from Gen 3. So kind of get some points there for me. I really like all the Pokemon cries that sound a lot better. And you can hear all the Gen 1 cries in their glory. I don't know if they like... I feel like in most of the franchise, when they try to do the Gen 1 cries, they all sound very similar. So like when you go back and do a Gen 1 cry in any game, it kind of sounds older than it does in other games. I think that's really cool, but at the same time, I guess it does have like naturally have a buff. So
yeah.
And I like the clicking noises like blink and like yeah, I really like the sounds in these games in Gen 3. They're some of my favorites, especially like leveling up and stuff like that.
Yeah. the funny thing about the cries is that in Gen 1, so, like many Pokemon had very, very similar cries to each other. I think only a few of them were actually identical, but many of them were like so similar that they might as well have been identical. And so that problem carries over to these remakes, to where like I would have rather them put in some effort to like differentiate between identical cries more, because some of them really do sound like exactly the fucking same. So it's like why can you just, you know, tweak it a little bit? And I think like in later gens they started to do that, like Gen 6, I think, with X and Y. They really did start to like update these cries to the modern standards, sort of.
Yeah.
But I think they could have done that at this point instead of waiting for so long to like differentiate them a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty minor thing, but it is a thing that I noticed. Another personal preference thing of mine is that I find the music to be a little more annoying in this game than I do in Ruby and Sapphire. And I know this is sounding like just a crazy, you know, pro Ruby Sapphire rant of ours from both of us. But I swear I have a point this time. I think the soundtrack's a little like, once again, it's a little more like bright or happy-go-lucky compared to Ruby Sapphire, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about the vibe just being kind of brighter. But I think in general, the music is like faster, and the battle music especially is like way more, like there's way more stuff going on in the battle music. It was like, like way more so than you hear in Gen 3.
Yeah.
Like from that perspective, it does bother me, but I think that is mostly personal preference. Because I think Gen 1 has great music. Like the tunes themselves are timeless. They've lasted for over 20 years.
Yeah.
Is it over 20 years? They've lasted for exactly /over 20 years. And like the tunes themselves are great. It's just that sometimes they can get a little much, I think. The battle music mostly.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, there were some different elements in there because they did incorporate actual, I guess, instruments or instrumentation into the battle theme. So I think it worked really well for Gen 1 because it was just like a bleep. And so it was just kind of the notes themselves. But now it's like they tried to do it with like multiple instruments. And I don't know that it sounded really good.
I think it sounded good. I think it's just me personally preferring like the tunes that were introduced later in the series. But I think the way they adapted the existing tunes is really good.
Okay, fair enough.
There's something else I want to say about that. Oh yeah, I don't think that Gen 1 even had like percussion. I think it was all just
that's one thing I did notice is this game had like bass a little bit.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Like that's a pretty significant remix, I think, is like adding percussion to tracks that used to not have any. But I'm sure when the tunes were written like by the person, they were like, oh, there's going to be percussion, but then they got to the Game Boy like, oh, never mind, can't do that.
Yeah. There's a little bit of charm though to like the Game Boy sounds. I really like them.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think I've talked all I could about audio.
Me too, to be quite honest.
Cool. Well, let's hear your rating.
My rating is a big, fat, normal weight, skinny 95.
Wow. This game's up there for you.
Yeah, I mean, with the audio, I think all my problems come down to like personal preference, so I can't take too many points off for personal preference.
So I'm curious if you had to like pick a song from the soundtrack to jam to, like this is my jam, which one would it be?
The one that's always in my head is it's like the Cerulean City theme, where it's like na 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 na. Na, 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 na. Well, actually, that might be like a Pewter City. It's like one of the very first city themes, but that's one that's my jam for sure.
Is it not the Pokémon Center?
The Pokémon Center is very similar.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Anyway, back to the rating. I gave mine an 80.
Oof.
Yeah.
What a bad score. 8 out of 10. Dang.
I disagree. That's. I think it's pretty good.
That was sarcasm. I'm sure you were aware.
Yeah. Good soundtrack. Overall, pretty solid. It's not super substantial, in my opinion, but does a pretty good job of what it needs to do. I give it an 80.
Fair enough. I still think we have like a fundamental disagreement on something here, but I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And makes our show all the better.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go to everyone's, depending on your point of view, favorite section or second favorite section, because no one likes gameplay, but content.
No one likes gameplay. The least important category, as we've discussed.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, let's hear what you got, young Pete boy.
All right. Shoot. Well, I'm a big fan of the content. I think the content is the strongest part of this game, actually. Because I would consider it kind of besides the minor critiques that I've had up to this point, I feel like it's kind of a perfect remake because it takes all the old content you know and love, it updates it with new mechanics and new graphics and like higher fidelity audio. But also there's a lot of post-game content, which is totally new. You have this entire kind of sub-region called the Sevi Islands that you can explore after you beat the Pokemon League. And there there's like a little bit of plot, but it's not really real plot, so I'm not going to really talk about it. But you go and you can travel across these islands and you can catch a bunch of Gen 2 Pokemon, which is cool, and fight against some cool trainers. You can even catch the Unknown.
Ooh.
They make an appearance here. I believe Moltres is also moved from wherever it was in Gen 1 to these islands, so that's pretty neat. But it's a lot of post-game content. You can go back and you can fight the Elite Four and the Champion again if you want, but you can never refight the gym leaders themselves.
Yeah.
Which is something they introduced in Pokemon Emerald, and I kind of do miss that when I go back and play this game. But overall, I have some more points, but I do want to stop there for a second and see what you think of all that content.
Wow, I didn't know you could go back and play the gym leaders in Emerald. It's kind of crazy.
You can play them like 5 times, and they get super strong by the end. It's crazy. I've never even done that. Like, I've never actually beaten Emerald, although I have beaten Sapphire, so it's pretty nuts.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, I actually didn't beat the game per se because there got to be a point for me. Well, honestly, since Pokemon Let's Go came out around the time I played it, it was much easier for me to go back to that game and not really continue our Nuzlocke. I might continue it at some point. Dave and I were... Dave. My girlfriend, Katie...
My girlfriend, Dave.
My girlfriend, Dave. She goes by Dave as her tag. But we were playing through the game, and then Pokemon Let's Go came out, and honestly, it was just such a better time that I kind of just dropped it. But in terms of the content, I think it's pretty good. When you're talking about any Pokemon game, I mean, content's pretty up there. Like, you automatically, like, just by saying mainstream Pokemon game, you're like, all right, well, there's an easy, at least 75 points if you just literally remake everything that Yellow did. So, I think it's pretty solid. I did, like I said, I don't know much about post game, but since you told me, you travel from island to island, I thought that's pretty cool catching all the Pokemon, but it sounds like it doesn't really add a whole lot to either the story or things to do. You just kind of go to different islands and catch Pokemon, which is kind of cool.
I would say it's more than that. Like, story wise, I mean, there's one story where like, oh, a girl's lost in a forest, you have to go find her, but it's not really a thing. And there's like 2 or 3 little things like that. But I think the value it brings is pretty good because like you're not just going around and catching Pokemon, because there are like interesting terrains that you have to cross. Like, there's a decent variety of terrain across the islands. Some of them are like really big and some of them are small, and you fight some like pretty decently hard trainer battles. So I would say it's like a good amount of content. Like, it's not an entire new region like how Gen 2 brought back Kanto after you beat Johto. Like, it's not on that level, and shit, I don't think anything will ever be on that level.
Yeah,
but
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, but I still think it's a pretty good amount of content. Like, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to gauge that because I knew a lot of this rating would be solely like what you say, because I'm going to have to rely on you a lot for post-game content. I just know that the in-game current content is going to be more of what I've been saying all along, is just didn't add a whole lot. But I was very curious about post-game, which I never got to. But it sounds like, from what you've said, it adds a good bit to the game. So that's really good to know. I was very curious about it, especially going into the game. I was like, okay, this is supposed to be a Gen 3 remake, where the Gen 3? And you're like, well, not necessarily Gen 3, but you can catch, Gen 2. And I was like, oh, I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really neat.
Neat.
In terms of the main game, I really felt like I was playing Gen 1. I just didn't want to play Gen 1 again. I don't know why. And here's another thing. I played Pokemon Yellow to the ground. Like, I just played that game over and over and over again. So the story to me became pretty repetitive. And then when other Pokemon games came out, I was just like, oh yeah, like, you know, I really like these stories. And like you said, you know, as the story matured, it became a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. But now I don't play Pokemon for the story. And when going back and playing Pokemon Let's Go, I had a lot of fun because we may review that game at some point. We may not. I don't know. But if it was really nice to look at, and it really felt really nice, felt new, felt fresh. And this game didn't really feel new to me. It felt like a Gen 1, Gen 3 mix. And that's really what it was. And I think it did a decent job and a good job. It did pretty well for me.
I think that considering that it is, you know, I'm not sure like how the marketing team spun these games when they came out. Like, I don't remember seeing commercials or seeing like ads or anything. So I'm not sure how they phrased it. Like, is it a remake or a remaster or a reimagining or whatever? Because I think that the verbiage that you choose there is pretty important.
Yeah.
Because if you call it like a remaster, I think then that means like the stuff we were talking about this whole time where you like just improve things but don't introduce anything crazy. Like, that's what a remaster is, right? / remake. I think you could kind of use the same word there. So like in that case, I would consider this kind of like a perfect remake / remaster. But if they called it like a reimagining where it's like, oh, this is like a cool new remix sort of thing, then I would be a lot harsher on all this stuff that we've talked about. And so like, rather than giving visuals a 90, I would have given them probably like an 80 or something, like, because I would be expecting more new stuff, right? So
yeah,
that's kind of the approach that I've come at with all these sections, but especially with content. Because in content, like the rest of the improvements make up most of the content, and then the rest of the content is like the post game, right?
I think that's a good point. I would call it like you'd said, a remaster remake. If I had to pinpoint, I would say it's more of a remaster because it feels like a sort of Dark Souls remastered kind of thing. And I keep going back to Dark Souls every time we do reviews, but
every game is Dark Souls.
But not in the sense that I normally say it. Like this, like they remade the original Dark Souls and they said Dark Souls remastered, and it's literally like a visual upgrade plus some other bug fixes and things like that, and incorporating modern Dark Souls into the old Dark Souls. And so I think that's exactly what this game did. And I don't know that they really marketed it as such because they called it FireRed. So it's kind of like, yeah. Well, no, you know what? I guess they did because I never thought green as a version because I always thought red, blue, and yellow. But I keep forgetting green was a thing. We didn't have it.
Yeah, that probably... that was definitely like a point of confusion for me until I learned what green version was.
Yeah,
but that's pretty neat of them to pay homage to the originals like that.
Yeah, and it makes you feel like you're getting a taste of what green version was. But
yeah,
probably
even though you're definitely not.
Yeah, I was about to say even though you're really not. But yeah, no, I don't have much to say. I'll just be adding on to anything else you have to say.
We'll get ready because I got a few more things to say.
All right, let's do it.
Not too many. So I do want to talk about like the connectivity with other games because Pokemon's always been about like trading and all that stuff. So as is tradition, FireRed has a few version exclusive Pokemon and LeafGreen does as well. Nothing really special about that because it's tradition and it was even by this point. So if you want to get all the Pokemon, you either got to trade with friends or you got to get another game and another Game Boy actually and trade with yourself. So that's kind of fun, so to speak. I was playing Pokemon after it was popular. Like when I started playing it, it had kind of gotten uncool already.
Yeah.
So like I didn't really have anyone to trade with ever. There was one dude I traded with on like a field trip with like a different school. He didn't even go to my school, which was the real kicker because I couldn't like ever see him again. So that was kind of funny. But yeah, so you can connect with other people as always. So you have the usual like kind of multiplayer stuff because you can do battles with your friends, obviously. You can connect with Pokemon Coliseum, which was the GameCube game that came out around this time. And so I would actually do that. I would transfer Pokemon from this game to Pokemon Coliseum and then transfer them from Coliseum to Ruby Sapphire, I think. Did I do that? It's been a long time. It's been over a decade. I can't remember exactly what I did.
You'll have to phone young Pete.
Yeah, call up young Pete Boy, the actual young Pete Boy. See what he has to say. But yeah, so there's like a fair amount of connectivity and all that stuff. Nothing too crazy special, but all the stuff you'd expect. One like feature that's kind of a content feature that I miss is that in Ruby Sapphire they had secret bases.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes, that was so good. And that's what I'm saying. I want that. I want it again. But I want that in Gen 1 because how cool would that be to have secret bases in Gen 1? But no, I just got to go back to the old. Anyway, I'm not going on a rant.
But yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, secret bases, I didn't get too much into them. So I don't personally care too much about the omission, but they are a cool feature and I think they should have been in this game. But what they were is basically you could use a move called Secret Power, which is a TM, to open up certain little spots in the overworld. Like there were some caves, some tree houses that you could basically decorate with furniture. So you could go to Pokemarts and buy furniture for your secret base and you could go decorate it and whatever. And then when you traded with somebody or like otherwise connected your game to someone else's game, their secret base would appear in your game and vice versa. And you could play an AI version of your friend with whatever Pokemon they had at the time. And like, that's super sick. Like, that's really cool.
I think that's super cool. And I wish they kept that mechanic, but I think, I don't know, it must have been an unpopular idea. So I'm really glad that you enjoyed that because I could not find anyone to find it cool like I did. Because I spent so much time on my secret base and I tried to get like all my other friends who I could connect with, maybe even Chris, who didn't care too much about it. I was like, oh yeah, I want to see your secret base. You can see mine. And he didn't care. And it's just like, man, nobody cares about this. So if we had been friends back in the day, we could have visited each other's secret bases.
Ooh. But what was I going to say? You know, you and I have talked about Gen 3 before, obviously, and I knew that you were a fan of Gen 3, but I think just now through this review, like I'm realizing how much you played it and like how much you like it because I didn't know how much you enjoyed it before you started doing this review.
Oh yeah, no, I played Ruby probably the second most out of any Pokemon game. Like it's right behind Yellow.
Dang.
And Yellow was replayed because it was my first game and I just loved Pokemon so much. But yeah. I really liked the secret bases and it was a really big highlight for me, especially, you know, considering the environment. You really felt like you got like a really hidden base in the corner or like it's raining. Like, you know, you're in like the, feels like a swamp, but not really. Yeah. It's like marsh.
Yeah.
And you get a secret base there and I was like, oh, this is a really good one. And you decorate it, you deck it out, and then nobody cares in real life, but I cared.
I cared, darn it.
Yeah. Oh, and then I know this might also be pretty unpopular, but I enjoyed Pokemon contests. I thought those were
Oh, shit, I forgot about that.
Yeah. It's like a whole nother, like, you know how you gym battles? It's like you also had Pokemon contests that you could optionally do, but it felt like a whole, like, you get a gym battle and a Pokemon contest, and they weren't easy.
No, they're not. Like you have to give your Pokemon, like you have to very carefully consider your Pokemon's movesets for contests. So basically, the way that contests work, and I don't want to talk about this too much because it's not in this game, but
yeah,
basically it's like a dog show sort of thing where you have your Pokemon, and you can feed them berries to increase like their coolness or their toughness or whatever category of which there are 5. So you enter your Pokemon in that category of contest, and you teach them moves that will allow them to like impress the judges and also mess with other Pokemon. And there's not as big a variety of like types of moves as there are in battle, but every battle move has its own contest effect. So if you want your Pokemon to have the ideal loadout, you have to like give them all the berries to boost whatever stat, like their contest stat. For example, coolness or toughness. And you have to make sure they have the right moves as well. So basically, like, your contest Pokemon ideally is not going to be a battle Pokemon unless like the stars magically align and it works out.
Yeah.
And I found that out the hard way because I had an Aggron that I wanted to win the tough contest. And like I got all the way up to the highest level of contest, but I could never beat it because like I didn't give him the right berries.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I fucking ruined my chances with this Aggron, and I never did a contest again after that because I didn't realize how important the berries were.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I really enjoy. I had a Swellow that I got pretty far up there, and then I think you get a really cool item from doing those that kind of can help you out in battle. So it's the way it worked together was really great. And so all of this to say, bringing it back into FireRed, LeafGreen, is that I played that, and then I played FireRed and LeafGreen, and I was like, oh, come on, I want some of these features in Gen 1. How cool would that be?
Yeah.
But, you know, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. And it was a good Gen 1 remake, but I was just really wanting those features.
You know what, actually, now that I remember that contests don't exist, I might have to take off just a few more points, just like I did with the visuals, man.
Yeah, it's okay.
Really editing on the fly here. I don't usually do this, but, you know,
well,
there's a first time for everything.
Well, speaking of, are you about wrapped up on that content?
I have one more fun fact about content.
Oh, let's
and
hear
then I'm
it.
done.
I love fun
All right,
facts.
this is a good one.
Okay, good.
So apparently, the storyline of Gen 1 is simultaneous with the storyline of Gen 3. So in Kanto, you have Team Rocket doing whatever they do, and then in Hoenn, you have Team Aqua and Team Magma doing whatever they do.
That's really cool.
Which, like, that sounds pretty inconsequential, and it probably is, but I have this to say about it. So in Kanto, you have Team Rocket, who, you know, what do? They steal Pokemon, they, like, infiltrate the Sylph Corporation and, like, take over a company briefly until some rat-nosed kid comes and kills all of them. Whatever.
Yeah.
Like, not all that impressive. You play Pokemon Ruby, fucking Team Magma wants to drain the fucking ocean.
Yeah.
The entire ocean. Or you play Sapphire, and Team Aqua wants to fucking drown the planet.
Yeah.
With water. And it's like, dude, Team Rocket needs to step up their game, man. Like, they're doing small time shit. Team Aqua and Team Magma are stealing submarines, and they're awakening legendary Pokemon. And that just speaks to how Pokemon was, you know, getting edgier as time went on and getting grander. Like, the storyline became way more important in Gen 3 than it did, like, and even Gen 2, I don't think. But that's just wild to me. Like, when I heard that, I was like, yo, Team Aqua and Team Magma are wrecking it.
Dude, yeah, I agree with you, man. Like, I thought, like, when I was playing Pokemon Let's Go, you know, Team Rocket was doing all that. I was like, man, these guys are small time. Like, one, I'm a little kid going through here, like, wrecking some fools, and how are they this bad at Pokemon? And then second of all, like, really, you're just gonna go around? Yeah, I mean, like, small time compared to those guys. And I think later on it's like time travel and like warping universes. I don't even know. It gets crazy.
Yeah, they do some weird stuff. I know Sun and Moon is on some crazy next level ish with like time traveling and like alternate dimensions, and like they figure out some way to like canonically bring back all the past villains into one game, which I think they do in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And like, I'm not going to really mess with that very much. Like, I don't know about that, but my main point here is that Team Rocket is a bunch of little shits, and they need to step up their game. That's my main takeaway from all this.
Yeah, I hope they don't get to a point like they did in X-Men where like everything gets too crazy, and so they just like reset the timeline every time it gets too crazy. They're like, they went back in time and fixed everything. So like, oh, okay.
Well, that was my fun fact, and I'm officially done with the content.
Well, cool, man. I think I will give my rating. It's an 80. Oh, I hit you really quick with it. Oh, wait, no, sorry, not an 80. 85.
The fake out from Kev.
Right, I originally had it at 80, but since you enlightened me on the post-game stuff, I was like, okay, I'll bump it up a little more.
So my original score was a 98. Which would have been the first time that I wasn't an increment of 5.
Right.
But then I remembered. So the reason I had taken off the 2 points to get to the 98 was because of the lack of secret bases. I was like, oh, they could have, like, I feel like the content was pretty much perfect except for that. But then you reminded me about the contests. And I was like, oh, actually, that's more content they don't have. So then I brought it down to 95. So I'm officially at a 95 for content.
Okay. Well, cool. Let's do some number crunching.
All right, we'll do some number crunching right after this ad from the Yeasty Boys. Just kidding. They don't have an ad, but they do have a new episode, so go check that out.
Oh, boys.
All right, so we're back from the number crunching. It was such a hassle.
Yeah.
You know, all the work we put in so much work to this podcast, and we hope that you guys appreciate it. Because you know, playing games takes a lot out of a person.
Jeez,
you know?
I can't believe you guys make us play these games.
Kevin. This was a stupid idea for a podcast, but we're in too deep. Can't stop now.
Yeah,
we're almost at the end of season 2. And we're going to finish out strong. But before we finish out, we got to give ourselves our overall ratings for this game. So do you want to start with yours?
Hell yeah, brother. So gameplay was at 85, right? And going on to aesthetics, I had visuals at 85 and audio at 80, bringing my aesthetics to an 82.5. And then for the content, it was an 85. All this to say, my overall rating is an 84.2.
Nice. On my end, I gave gameplay a 95. I gave visuals a 90 and audio a 95. So my aesthetics rounds to 90 or averages to 92.5. And my content, I gave a big fat skinny rich poor 95, which altogether averages out to a 94.2. So I'm like 10 points ahead of you, man. I was feeling the love. You were a little more reserved, but you had your reasons and I had mine. And our overall IG rating nets out to an 89.2.
Yeah, we have a pretty collective high thought of this game.
Yeah, still a good game. It's ranked currently number 8 out of 18 on our list of games that we've reviewed. So no slouch.
Yeah, I think it's at a pretty good spot. Metacritic had it at I think around an 81 or 82. So, yeah, I think, we really like this game. And if you're looking for, if you haven't played Gen 1 yet, start here. I think that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd say start with this and then play Ruby and Sapphire and be like, yo, this is like pretty similar, but noticeably better.
Yeah, I agree.
If we review that game, I would probably give it like all 100s. Well, no, I'd give gameplay like a 95, and then everything else I'd probably give 100. So, spoiler alert, in case we ever do.
Well, I guess we don't need to review it.
Oh, here's a fun fact, actually. All 3 of the lowest ranking games in IG history are from Season 2.
Wow.
We have Chopper Attack at the very end, which is episode 2-4. Luigi's Mansion, which is 2-5. So, shit, actually two underperforming games in a row on that one. Although Luigi's Mansion was a lot better than Chopper Attack. And Super Monkey Ball 2 in third to last place. So it's pretty interesting. This is one of the highest placing games in Season 2, except for A Link to the Past, which is the number 1. So
yeah, we've got ratings all over the place, man.
And you can find them all on our website, which is games.theigcast.com, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps up a very excellent episode, my dude.
This is a pretty passionate one.
Oh, for sure.
Which I thoroughly anticipated. There's always a lot to talk about with Pokemon. There's just so much content and so much history of Pokemon. You gotta just talk about it for like hours.
I agree, man.
Yeah.
Or maybe an hour.
maybe an hour and 23 minutes. Although I will trim it down a little bit, I'm sure. One more fun fact to close this off is that the first time I met Kevin in any capacity was when he was streaming Pokemon Gold on Twitch.
Yeah.
Back in the fall of 2015. So
Ooh.
Pokemon is what brought us together, man.
Dude, that's so true. You know what? Let's bump the rating up just because of that.
Hell yeah. 1,000 out of 100. Because without Pokemon, our friendship wouldn't exist.
It's slightly true. Slightly true. Maybe we would have found each other through natural video game means. I'd like to think that we would have connected through video games in some way.
Yeah, if not Pokemon, then hopefully a different one.
Yeah.
But having said all that, having gotten the bromance out of the way, it is time. Love you too. It is time for us to end the episode. As far as social media goes, you can find us mostly on Twitter, which is the IG_cast, as always. We're on Facebook too, but like, you don't have to bother unless you don't have Twitter. There's no reason for you to not just do Twitter. Although, actually, I take that back because I'm forgetting that we have an Instagram account now.
Ooh, yeah, we do. We've been pretty active on that as well. So if you're into the whole Instagram thing, we do some pretty cool posts on there. Even some like story stuff, which I never do. But hey,
I'm gonna have to check that out because I have an Instagram, but I don't like go on it, so that's why I keep forgetting about it.
Yeah.
But I will check on that after we finish recording, so I can catch myself up. And I'm sure that you and Dave, I believe, is kind of co-managing the account.
Yeah, she's mostly managing it. Some things that she wanted to do, and I asked if she wanted to do, and so she's really enjoying it. And I help out a little bit here and there, but it's mostly her.
Oh. Now we have too many people on our payroll already.
Yeah.
So yeah, find IG on IG. And there's so many ways to listen to us. You're listening to us right now, so good job. You found it.
You found us.
But yeah, we're on what? Apple Podcasts. We're on
Spotify, Stitcher,
YouTube,
just
Stitcher,
ask Alexa, YouTube.
Alexa.
Yeah.
Hey Alexa.
No, she can't hear you.
Dang it. But yeah, and then as far as plugs go, we got our good friends, the Eastie Boys, who we mentioned. They're on winter break, and actually so will we. We will be on winter break after this episode, I believe. So we will come back to you whenever we come back to you. Sometime early in January, most likely.
Yeah.
But we'll figure that out. And we will keep you guys updated, of course. And then other podcast is the Secret Levels podcast, who do retro video games, much like we do, but they do exclusively retro. Well, actually, no, they've done like one or two modern games. So yeah, they are actually pretty similar to us. We've had them, or we've been on their show. We might have them on our show at some point. We'd like to collab again with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some people we should definitely check out. And then also check out Z-Link Gaming on YouTube. Like his videos. Spam him with comments about how much you love him. He's going to appreciate that, I think.
Yes, I agree. Well, I think that does it, man. I think you did a hell of a job closing out this episode.
Thanks, man.
Well, I guess we'll see you guys later. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, love you too, guys.
As always, bye, Felicia.
Bye, Felicia.